Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think affects pretty much all of us, and that is transportation safety.
Absolutely.
We all use various forms of transportation, and we often, don't even give a second thought to the inherent risks involved.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's easy to take it for granted.
And also the engineering that goes into making it as safe as possible.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be a great topic to dig into.
Absolutely.
The World Health Organization estimates that about 1.3 million people die each year from road traffic injuries. So it's clearly a huge global issue.
And it's an issue that has effects way beyond just, those traffic fatalities. It affects the millions of people that are injured. It affects economies. It affects healthcare systems. There's a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, so I think we have a lot to cover. We're going to be talking about motor vehicles, railroads, aviation, and even pipelines.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a fascinating ride.
All right, let's dive in.
So let's start with what is probably the most relatable to our listeners, and that is motor vehicle accidents. I think, sadly, it's the vast majority of transportation-related incidents.
It is. It's really the lion's share.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people might just assume it's all about reckless driving, but there's so much more to it, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Human behavior is a huge factor, but there's also vehicle design, road infrastructure. There are traffic management systems. It's a really complex ecosystem.
Yeah. So let's unpack that human element first. We hear a lot about impaired driving, both from alcohol and drugs, and it's a message that's been hammered home for decades, but the statistics are still really alarming.
They are. You would think that with all of the awareness campaigns and the stricter laws, it would be getting better, but impaired driving is still a leading cause of fatal crashes. And in the U.S. alone, almost 30 people a day die in crashes that involve an alcohol-impaired driver.
Wow. And it's mind-boggling that people still take that risk. And it's not just themselves that they're putting at risk, but it's innocent people as well.
Yeah, and it's not just alcohol these days. We're seeing a rise in crashes that involve drug-impaired drivers, prescription medications, illicit drugs, and even some over-the-counter medications can cause drowsiness or impair your judgment.
Yeah, so it's just a reminder to always be really mindful of what you're putting into your body and how it might affect your ability to drive safely. But even if you are perfectly sober, and alert, there's another pervasive danger on the roads today, and that is distraction.
Yes, absolutely. We live in a world that's constantly, feeding us information, and the temptation to multitask when you're driving is huge.
Yeah.
But the reality is our brains just aren't wired for that. When we try to juggle driving with things like texting or talking on the phone, fiddling with our GPS, even just daydreaming, we're really setting ourselves up for disaster.
And it's not just those blatant distractions. I've been reading about something called inattention blindness, which is where our brain can actually fail to register critical information, like a pedestrian stepping onto the road if we're too focused on something else.
Yeah, that's a fascinating area of research, and it really underscores how vulnerable we are to distractions when we're behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Even a momentary lapse in attention can have devastating consequences.
So we've got impaired driving, distraction. What other human factors contribute to motor vehicle accidents?
Well, there's speeding. It's basic physics. The faster you're going, the longer it takes to stop, the greater the force of impact in a collision.
And of course, that force just translates into more severe injuries.
Absolutely.
And then there's fatigue, which can be just as dangerous as driving under the influence.
Yeah, fatigue is a big one. When we're tired, our reaction times slow down, our judgment gets fuzzy, we're just much more likely to make mistakes.
I've definitely experienced that on long road trips, where my eyelids start to get a little heavy and my mind wanders. And it's a little scary to think how easily that could lead to an accident.
It's a very common experience, and it's something that we really need to be cognizant of. Planning regular breaks, getting enough sleep before a long drive, even just recognizing those early signs of fatigue. If you're yawning excessively, if you're having trouble focusing, these are all signs that you need to take a break.
So it sounds like staying safe on the road really requires a combination of personal responsibility, but also understanding the limitations of our own bodies.
It does, but it's not just about what's happening inside the car, right?
Yeah.
Vehicle design plays a huge role in protecting us if we do happen to be in a crash. Have you ever heard of the concept of crashworthiness?
I have. I've heard the term, but I'm not entirely sure I know what it means.
Okay, so crashworthiness basically refers to how well a vehicle protects its occupants during a collision. So it's all about minimizing the forces that are transmitted to the people inside the car and creating a survival space during a crash.
So it's not just about avoiding a crash, but it's also about minimizing the damage if one occurs.
That is exactly right. Think of it like this. If you drop an egg on a hard surface, it's going to crack. But if you drop it on a cushion, it's more likely to survive. Crashworthiness is about creating those cushions within a vehicle.
That's a great analogy. So how do engineers actually build crashworthiness into a vehicle?
Well, it's a combination of some pretty clever design features and using some really high-strength materials. One of the most important elements is something called a crumple zone.
I've heard of crumple zones. But aren't cars supposed to be built tough? I mean, why would you want part of a car to crumple?
I know, it does seem a little bit counterintuitive, but crumple zones are actually designed to deform and absorb energy during a collision. So by crumpling, they slow down the rate of deceleration. And they reduce the force that actually reaches the passenger compartment.
So it's like a sacrificial layer that's protecting the people inside.
Exactly. It's like a controlled demolition.
Yeah.
Absorbing the energy of the impact and directing it away from the people inside.
That's really interesting. So the crumple zone is kind of taking the brunt of the force. But what about the passenger compartment itself?
So the passenger compartment is designed to be very strong, very rigid, and it's meant to form a protective cage around the occupants. So it's constructed from high-strength steel, and it's reinforced in key areas to resist intrusion and to maintain its structural integrity during a crash.
So it's like a little safe room within the vehicle.
Yeah.
But even with a strong passenger compartment, wouldn't the impact still be pretty jarring for the people inside?
It would be, and that's where the other safety features come into play. Things like seatbelts, airbags, and padded dashboards. Seatbelts are really the first line of defense. They restrain occupants, they prevent ejection,
Right.
which is a leading cause of fatalities and crashes.
They keep you connected to the vehicle so you ride down the forces
Right.
rather than being flung around inside the car or worse, thrown out.
Exactly. And airbags act as supplemental cushions, so they deploy rapidly to protect your head and your chest from hitting those hard surfaces. The steering wheel, the dashboard, the windshield.
Yeah, I remember when airbags first came out, it was like a revolutionary technology.
It was. It really was a game changer in automotive safety.
Yeah.
And they've continued to evolve. Most vehicles now have multiple airbags standard. There are side impact airbags, even knee airbags in some cases.
Wow. It's really amazing how much engineering goes into these systems that we often just take for granted.
It is, and it's worth noting that all of these safety features are rigorously tested and they're regulated. So, for instance, in the U.S., we have the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, the FMVSS,
Right.
and that sets minimum safety requirements for any vehicle that's sold in this country.
That's reassuring to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like having a safety net built into our cars.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But even with all these advancements, accidents still happen.
Absolutely.
And that's where I guess accident reconstruction comes in.
Yeah. So what is accident reconstruction? It's basically like piecing together a puzzle.
Right.
Accident reconstructionists, they use physics, engineering principles, forensic evidence to determine exactly what happened in a crash.
Okay.
So they're analyzing skid marks, vehicle damage, witness statements, and other data to paint a picture of what led up to the collision.
Oh, so it's like detective work, but for car crashes.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And the information that they get from these reconstructions is incredibly valuable. It can be used to improve vehicle designs, identify dangerous road conditions, develop better safety regulations, even just educate drivers about the risks and the consequences of certain behaviors.
So every accident, in a way, contributes to making our roads safer for the future.
It does, yeah. It's a continuous learning process.
So moving away from cars for a moment, let's talk about another mode of transportation with a really rich history, and that is railroads.
All aboard.
Railroads have always kind of fascinated me, but they definitely had their share of dangers, especially in the early days.
Oh, yeah. Back in the day, coupling and uncoupling cars was a very hazardous job.
Right.
Led to a lot of injuries and deaths. But thankfully, modern safety improvements have made a huge difference.
Yeah, but even today, railroad accidents, they can be catastrophic.
They can.
I'm thinking of the Lac-Mégantic rail disaster in Canada back in 2013. A runaway train carrying crude oil derailed, exploded. It killed 47 people, destroyed much of the town. Just a horrific event, and it's a stark reminder, I think, of how important those safety measures are in the rail industry.
Yeah, and it really highlighted the importance of things like proper training,
Yeah.
secure cargo handling procedures, and having really robust emergency response plans.
It's also a reminder that even with all the technological advancements, human error can still play a big part in accidents.
Absolutely. And with any complex system, there's always room for improvement. So the rail industry is constantly striving to enhance safety, through ongoing research, innovation, and adopting new technologies.
So let's shift gears again and talk about aviation. Plane crashes, thankfully, are rare, but when they do happen, they tend to be really high-impact events.
Yeah, they're very rare, but when they happen, they're very significant.
And understanding aviation accidents often involves something called the Swiss cheese model. Ever heard of that?
I have, yeah.
So imagine slices of Swiss cheese, each with holes in it, representing different contributing factors.
Right.
And so it's not usually one single cause, but rather a series of events lining up perfectly to create that catastrophic situation.
Yeah, a single hole in a slice of cheese isn't going to let anything through. But when you have multiple holes that align, then you have a pathway for disaster.
Yeah, it's kind of a chilling way to visualize it, but it makes sense. So what are some of those holes in the Swiss cheese when it comes to aviation?
Well, human error is a big one. Pilot fatigue, communication breakdowns between the cockpit and air traffic control, inadequate training, errors in judgment, all of these things can contribute to creating those holes in the safety system.
And as technology advances, we're also seeing potential issues with automation playing a role in some aviation accidents. It's like we're handing over more and more control to these complex computer systems.
Yeah.
But what happens if those systems malfunction?
Right.
Or what if pilots become too reliant on them and lose some of their manual skills?
That's a valid concern. As we do become more reliant on automated systems, it's absolutely crucial that we ensure that they are designed and implemented with the highest level of safety in mind, and that the pilots receive adequate training to understand those systems and to maintain their ability to intervene when necessary.
So it's all about finding that balance between, human oversight and technological advancement.
That's right.
But on a more positive note, advancements in safety technology have made flying significantly safer. I mean, there's flight data recorders, or black boxes as they're often called.
Right.
And that can provide really invaluable information for investigators to understand what went wrong in a crash.
They can.
And then there's ground proximity warning systems that can alert pilots if they're getting too close to the ground or obstacles.
Yeah. That helps prevent those controlled flight into terrain accidents.
It's amazing how much information those black boxes can provide. It's like they unlock the secrets of what happened in those final moments of a flight.
Yeah, they're incredible tools for accident investigation, and they really have contributed significantly to improving aviation safety over the years.
Okay, let's move on to a mode of transportation that I think often kind of flies under the radar, and that is pipelines.
Yeah, pipeline.
They transport oil, gas, water, other materials over vast distances, often unseen. But they do come with their own unique risks.
They do. Pipelines are sort of like the unsung heroes of our infrastructure.
Right.
But they do present some unique risks.
Things like explosions, environmental damage from leaks.
Absolutely. Those are the big ones. And these incidents can happen for all kinds of reasons. There could be corrosion, there could be material handling errors, inadequate inspection or maintenance. Even natural disasters like earthquakes and floods can cause problems.
So it's like this hidden network with its own set of vulnerabilities.
It is. And because pipelines often run through these very remote areas, the consequences of accidents can be quite severe, both in terms of human life and the environmental impact.
So what's being done to mitigate those risks and ensure that these pipelines are operated safely?
Well, there are a number of regulatory measures and control methods in place.
Okay.
So, for example, pipeline companies are required to conduct regular inspections, both internal and external, to check for any corrosion or any damage. They also use pretty sophisticated monitoring technologies that can detect leaks or pressure changes that could signal that there's a problem.
So it's like a combination of proactive measures and reactive responses.
Precisely. And in the event that there is a leak or a rupture, there are emergency response plans that have been developed to try to contain the situation and minimize the impact on the environment and the surrounding communities.
It's reassuring to know that these safeguards are in place. Now, before we wrap up this portion of the discussion, let's touch on one more critical aspect of transportation safety, and that is the transport of hazardous materials.
Yeah, hazmat. This is where things can get very interesting and also potentially very dangerous if not handled properly.
Yeah, it's not just about getting things from point A to point B. It's about doing so safely when those things could pose a really serious threat to both people and the environment.
That's right. Think about transporting flammable liquids, corrosive chemicals, radioactive materials. These are not things you want to see involved in an accident.
Definitely not. In fact, I remember reading about a hazmat incident that occurred in Crescent City, Illinois, back in 1970. A gas tank exploded during transport, and it absolutely devastated the town. Killed 18 people, injured hundreds more. And it's just a stark reminder, I think, of why we need to take hazmat transport very seriously.
It was a tragedy, and it really did lead to a lot of changes in how we regulate and manage the transport of hazardous materials. Today, there are really strict guidelines to make sure that these substances are packaged properly, that they're labeled properly, and that they're transported in a way that minimizes the risk of accidents.
So what are some of the key things to keep in mind when it comes to hazmat safety?
Well, it starts with proper classification and identification. So the U.S. Department of Transportation has this system for classifying hazardous materials based on their properties and the risks that they pose.
So there's a way to tell at a glance whether something's flammable, corrosive, explosive, or whatever else it might be.
Exactly. And then based on that hazard class, there are specific requirements for packaging, labeling, and handling. So it's all about clarity and communication, making sure that everybody involved in that transport chain, from the shipper to the carrier to the receiver, they all know what they're dealing with and they know how to handle it safely.
It sounds like a system that's designed to minimize the potential for any surprises.
That's the goal. And then, of course, there are specific requirements for the vehicles that are used to transport hazmat.
So it's not just any old truck that can haul a tanker full of flammable liquid.
No, definitely not. There are regulations that cover everything, from the design and construction of the vehicle to the safety equipment that needs to be on board.
Really fascinating how much detail goes into keeping us safe, even from things that we rarely see or think about.
It is. And that attention to detail extends to emergency response planning as well. You know, hazmat incidents, they require specialized knowledge and equipment to handle them safely. So there are teams of trained professionals, and there are very specific response procedures that are in place to deal with those situations.
So it's like having a safety net for the safety net.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's all about layers of protection and having that comprehensive approach to managing risks.
So this has been a really fascinating overview of, I think, the complexities of transportation safety. And we've really only just scratched the surface.
We have.
We've gone from the familiar dangers of motor vehicle accidents to the less visible but equally important world of railroads, aviation, pipelines, and hazmat transport.
And there's so much more to explore within each of those areas.
There is, yeah. So let's take a pause here, and when we return, we'll delve a little deeper into some of these specific safety measures and technologies that are being used to make these modes of transport even safer. Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. Before the break, we were just starting to uncover, I think, some of the hidden dangers that are lurking within various modes of transportation. You know, from hazmat transport to pipelines. It's clear there's a lot more to safety than I think meets the eye.
Oh, there is. And while we touched upon some of the general risks involved in each of those modes, let's really dive into the specifics of how these hazards are being addressed and what measures are being implemented to ensure, safer journeys for everybody.
Sounds good. I'm particularly curious about some of the advancements that have been made in safety features, specifically for vehicles. We spend so much time in our cars, and it's fascinating to me to think about how they're designed to protect us in those, critical moments.
It is. It's easy to just take those safety features for granted. But there's a world of sophisticated engineering and rigorous testing behind even something as seemingly simple as a seatbelt or an airbag.
Yeah. You had mentioned crumple zones earlier, and I always thought it was kind of counterintuitive to design parts of a car to crumple in an accident.
I know, right? It seems like you'd want the whole car to be as strong as possible, but those crumple zones are strategically engineered to absorb and redirect the force of impact away from the passenger compartment. Think of it like a boxer rolling with a punch to lessen the impact.
So by, I guess, strategically giving way, those crumple zones help to decelerate the passenger compartment more gradually and reduce the force that's experienced by the people inside.
Exactly. It's all about managing energy. You want to minimize the transfer of that destructive force to the occupants of the vehicle.
And what about the materials that are used in those crumple zones? Are they different from what's used in the rest of the car's body?
Absolutely. So while the passenger compartment is built from this very high-strength steel to form that, protective cage we talked about, crumple zones will often use materials that have very specific properties. And those properties allow them to deform in a very controlled manner.
So it's not just about being strong, but being strong in the right places and having the right kind of, give in other areas. That's pretty fascinating.
It is. It's all about physics and material science coming together.
Right. And it really highlights the thought and the engineering that goes into, modern vehicle safety. Speaking of engineering, what about those other safety features that we talked about, like seat belts and airbags, and how have those evolved over the years?
Well, even seat belts, which seem so simple, have undergone some pretty significant advancements. We've gone from those basic lap belts to the three-point restraints. And those help to distribute the force across both the chest and the pelvis, which reduces the risk of internal injuries. And a lot of modern seat belts now have pretensioners that will automatically tighten the belt during a crash, which helps to hold the occupant more securely in place.
I've also heard of force limiters in seatbelts. What do those do?
So those force limiters are designed to prevent the seatbelt itself from actually causing injuries. So it'll allow a controlled amount of slack once a certain force threshold is reached.
Okay.
And that helps to, prevent chest injuries from the belt itself while still effectively restraining the person in the seat.
Wow. Amazing how much thought goes into something as seemingly simple as a seatbelt.
It is. And airbags have gone through some equally impressive advancements. So we've gone from single front airbags to multiple airbags that are strategically placed throughout the vehicle, providing protection from a number of different angles.
And those deployments have to be timed perfectly, right? Too early and they could actually cause harm. Too late and they're useless.
Exactly. The timing and the force of that airbag deployment is absolutely critical. So there are sensors throughout the vehicle that are detecting the severity of the impact, the direction of the impact, and all of that information gets fed to the airbag deployment system, and they have to react in milliseconds. And even the inflators, the things that fill the airbags up with gas, are designed to inflate at a controlled rate. It's not just, a big explosion. It's all about providing that cushion rather than a punch.
It sounds like a delicate dance between physics and chemistry and engineering all happening in like milliseconds.
It is, and those advancements are continuing. So now you see airbags that are integrated into the seatbelts. There are side curtain airbags that deploy from the roof. Those help to protect people in rollovers. And even knee airbags in some cases, to help protect those lower extremities.
So it's not just about protecting the head and the chest anymore. It's a more kind of holistic approach to occupant safety.
Yeah, a much more comprehensive approach. And it's not even just about protecting the occupants during a crash anymore. Now, modern vehicles are increasingly incorporating features that are designed to prevent those accidents from happening in the first place.
Like those lane departure warnings and automatic emergency braking systems that we're seeing more and more of these days.
Those are great examples. So lane departure warnings, they use cameras and sensors to detect when a vehicle is drifting out of its lane. It'll give you an alert, sometimes even provide a little bit of corrective steering input in some cases. Mm-hmm. And automatic emergency braking systems, they use radar and cameras to detect potential collisions. If the driver doesn't react in time, it can actually apply the brakes automatically.
It's almost like having a co-pilot there, watching out for you.
In a way, it is. It's like having an extra set of eyes on the road. It can compensate for those human errors and prevent those split-second lapses in judgment or attention that can lead to an accident.
It's really fascinating how technology is being used to kind of augment our driving abilities and make our roads safer. What other technological advancements are kind of on the horizon when it comes to vehicle safety?
Well, one thing that's emerging is vehicle-to-vehicle communication. That's where the cars can essentially talk to each other, exchanging information about their speed and their position and their intentions. And that can help prevent collisions, especially at intersections or in those situations with limited visibility.
So it's like giving cars an extra set of eyes and ears to be aware of their surroundings.
Yeah, and this has the potential to completely revolutionize traffic flow and safety, especially as we move toward more connected and autonomous vehicles.
It's exciting and a little bit unnerving at the same time, but it seems like the goal is to create a system where, technology and human drivers can coexist safely.
That's the ideal, right? To have that seamless integration. And as with any new technology, there will be challenges, there will be growing pains. But the potential benefits in terms of safety are just enormous.
It's clear that a lot of thought and effort are going into making vehicles safer, but it's not just about the vehicles themselves, right? The roads we drive on, the environment we drive in, those things also play a crucial role.
Absolutely. Roadway design, environmental factors, these are critical components of transportation safety. When engineers and urban planners are designing roads and infrastructure, they're taking into account all sorts of factors, things like the curvature of the road, the traffic density, lighting conditions, weather patterns, all of those things can impact safety.
Yeah. I mean, I can see how things like guardrails and barriers and, clear signage, proper lighting, those things can make a big difference in preventing accidents, or at least mitigating the severity of crashes.
They do, and we're seeing some really innovative approaches to road design these days, things like roundabouts.
Yeah.
Those help reduce the risk of head-on collisions, or rumble strips that alert drivers if they're drifting out of their lane.
It's like building safety into the very fabric of our transportation infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not just about preventing those accidents from happening. It's also about mitigating the consequences if a crash does occur.
I'm curious, what kind of features are designed to, lessen the impact of a crash on the environment?
That's a great question. So there are things like breakaway poles and signposts that are designed to collapse on impact. That can help to reduce the risk of serious injury to the vehicle occupants. And a lot of work is being done to develop crash cushions and barriers that absorb energy and redirect vehicles away from, hazards.
It's fascinating how much your thought goes into designing a truly safe transportation environment.
It really is. And it's important to remember that it's a holistic approach. We're not just thinking about the vehicles, but also the infrastructure they're operating on and the environment that they're interacting with.
So it's like creating this whole safety ecosystem, right, that encompasses all aspects of transportation.
Yeah, exactly. And that ecosystem includes one very critical element that we haven't really talked about yet.
Okay.
And that is the human factor. We touched on impaired driving and distraction earlier, but there's a whole lot more to explore when we're talking about how our behaviors, our decisions, impact transportation safety.
I'm ready to dive into that. We've talked a lot about the engineering, the design aspects, but ultimately it's people behind the wheel or in the cockpit or, controlling those trains and pipelines.
You're right. At the end of the day, it's all about the people. And understanding human behavior, both in terms of those individual choices and the systemic factors, it's essential for creating a truly safe transportation system.
So let's shift our focus to that human side of the equation. What are some of the key factors that influence, driver behavior and safety?
Well, we've talked about impaired driving and distraction, and those are, as we said, major contributors to accidents. And I think it's worth reiterating the profound impact that alcohol consumption has on driving ability.
Yeah.
It cannot be overstated.
Even one drink can impair your judgment and reaction time.
Right. It absolutely can. And the thing about alcohol is the impairment starts long before you ever reach the legal limit. We're talking about reduced coordination, slower reaction times, impaired vision, difficulty making sound decisions, and these are all things you do not want to be dealing with when you are behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah. Good reminder to always err on the side of caution and never, ever drive if you've been drinking.
And it's not just alcohol. There are certain medications, both prescription and over-the-counter, that can also impair your ability to drive.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Some medications can cause drowsiness, dizziness, blurred vision. They can even affect your cognitive function. So it's crucial to always read those labels, consult with your doctor or your pharmacist about any potential side effects that could impact your driving.
So it's about being informed, being responsible about what you're putting into your body before you get behind the wheel of a car. It absolutely is. And along with substance use, distraction, as we said, is a huge factor in motor vehicle accidents. And we live in a world of constant stimulation. There's smartphones, there's GPS devices, there's infotainment systems. Even our passengers are competing for our attention.
I've definitely been guilty of that. Trying to multitask while driving, thinking I can handle it. But it only takes a split second of inattention to cause an accident.
And it happens more often than we realize. Our brains just aren't wired to effectively handle multiple complex tasks at once. When we try to drive and we're also trying to talk on the phone or text or even just adjust the radio, our attention gets divided and our reaction time just slows down.
I've heard the analogy that texting while driving is like driving blindfolded for the length of a football field.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And it highlights that very real danger of distracted driving. And it's not just about the obvious things like texting or talking on the phone, even something that seems harmless, like just changing the radio station or reaching for your drink, that can take your eyes off the road and your mind off the task of driving.
So it's about being mindful of all those little distractions and really making a conscious effort to just stay focused on driving.
Exactly. And even hands-free devices, while they're more convenient, can still be distracting.
Right.
Because they're engaging your cognitive resources. The conversation itself can take your focus away from driving, even if your hands are on the wheel.
It's a good reminder that driving is a complex task. It requires our full attention. But even with the best intentions, fatigue can creep in, especially on those long drives.
Fatigue is a silent killer on the roads. You know, it can impair our driving abilities just as much as alcohol or drugs, but it's often harder to detect, and it's harder to address.
I've definitely experienced those moments, especially on a long drive where my eyelids start to feel heavy and my focus drifts.
Yeah.
What are some of the signs of fatigue that we should be aware of?
Well, excessive yawning is a big one. You know, if you're having trouble keeping your eyes open or focused,
Yeah.
finding yourself drifting out of your lane, or maybe you're tailgating the car in front of you without even realizing it, just a general sense of drowsiness, that feeling of zoning out,
So it's about being aware of those, subtle changes in our mental and physical state while we're driving. What are some of the things we can do to combat fatigue on the road?
Well, the best defense is a good offense. Get a good night's sleep before you go on that long drive. Plan your trip so you can take regular breaks. Get out, stretch, walk around, get some fresh air. And if you start to feel drowsy at all, pull over to a safe location, take a nap if you can, switch drivers if possible.
All great tips. And it's important to remember that, caffeine, while it might provide a temporary boost, it's not a substitute for sleep.
That's right. Caffeine can mask those symptoms of fatigue. It can give you a false sense of alertness, but it's not addressing the underlying problem.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Exactly.
It might look okay on the surface, but the problem's still there.
Exactly. Now, in addition to that individual responsibility, there are external factors that can influence driver behavior and safety.
Things like speed limits and traffic laws and, law enforcement.
Absolutely. Speed limits are set for a reason.
Right.
They're there to help maintain a safe traffic flow and to reduce the severity of accidents. Traffic laws are designed to create order and predictability on the road. Minimize the potential for conflicts and collisions.
And law enforcement, of course, plays a crucial role in deterring risky driving behaviors and just making sure that people are following those rules of the road.
Absolutely. Just the presence of law enforcement officers and the threat of penalties can be very effective deterrents to things like speeding and impaired driving and other risky behaviors.
Yeah.
But it's not just about enforcement, It's also about education and awareness. It's about helping people understand the why behind the rules and encouraging a culture of safe driving.
It's about creating a collective mindset, right? Where safety is everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. We all have a role to play. And that mindset, that collective mindset, it needs to extend beyond just motor vehicles. As we move on and talk about other modes of transport, like railroads and aviation, we'll see that those same principles, personal responsibility, those systemic safeguards, that culture of safety, they're all just as crucial.
Yeah, it's all about recognizing that transportation safety is this complex web of interconnected factors, from the design of our vehicles and our infrastructure to the choices that we make as individuals.
Well said. And as we delve into those other modes of transport, I think we're going to uncover even more fascinating insights into the ongoing efforts that are being made to make all of our journeys safer.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break. And when we return, we'll explore the world of railroads and those safety measures that keep those massive machines rolling smoothly. Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. Before the break, we were talking about, how crucial that human factor is in transportation safety.
Yeah.
But now let's shift gears a little bit and hop aboard the world of railroads. I mean, those steel behemoths that are crisscrossing continents, they have their own unique set of safety challenges and innovations.
Absolutely. Railroads have come a long way since those early days when accidents were pretty common. Today, they're one of the safest modes of transportation, and that's because of a combination of things: technological advancements, stricter regulations, and a much bigger focus on safety culture.
It's fascinating to think about The evolution of safety on the railways, I think we often take for granted those, smooth journeys. But behind the scenes, there's this whole network of systems that are working tirelessly to prevent those accidents from happening.
You're right. And a lot of focus has been on improving braking systems. Modern trains use some pretty advanced braking technologies, things like electronically controlled pneumatic brakes and even dynamic brakes. And those actually use the train's electric motors to generate braking force.
Wow, that's really sophisticated compared to those, hand-operated brakes of yesteryear.
Yeah.
But even with those, advanced braking systems, trains can still take a long time to come to a complete stop, especially when they're carrying those, heavy loads.
That's true. And that's why signal systems and train control technologies are so crucial in preventing collisions. We've come a long way from those early days of relying just on visual signals and manual switching. Today we have systems like positive train control, or PTC, and that uses GPS and wireless communication and onboard computers to monitor train movements, enforce speed limits, and it can even automatically apply the brakes if a train is approaching a hazard or if it's exceeding its authorized speed.
So PTC is kind of like a vigilant guardian, right?
Yeah.
Overseeing the safe movement of trains across that entire network.
Yeah, it is. It's a very complex system that's been credited with preventing a lot of accidents. And the rail industry is constantly researching and implementing new technologies to make things even safer. We're seeing things like advanced track inspection systems that use lasers and ultrasound to detect flaws in the rails. And they're even using sophisticated sensors now that can monitor the condition of the wheels and the bearings in real time.
It's amazing how technology can be used to, anticipate and prevent those potential problems before they can even lead to an accident. But it's not just about technology, right? Human vigilance, expertise, those things still play a vital role.
Oh, absolutely. The people who operate and maintain those trains, the engineers, the conductors, the dispatchers, the mechanics, the signal maintainers, those folks are the backbone of rail safety. Their training, their experience, and their commitment to following those procedures, that's all crucial for safe operations.
It's a good reminder that even with all those technological advancements, that human element is still so essential. And speaking of the human element, I'm curious about how railroads are addressing the issue of fatigue among train crews. We talked about driver fatigue earlier, but operating a train, especially for extended periods, can be equally demanding, I would think.
Yeah, fatigue management is definitely a top priority in the rail industry. So there are very strict regulations that govern how many hours train crews can work without rest. And the railroads themselves have implemented all sorts of different programs and technologies to monitor alertness and to prevent those fatigue-related accidents.
It's reassuring to know that those safeguards are in place to protect both the crews and the public. But even with all those measures in place, accidents can still happen. And I'm thinking back to that Lac-Mégantic disaster that we talked about earlier, where that runaway train carrying crude oil derailed and exploded, causing, so much devastation. What lessons were learned from that tragedy, and how have those lessons kind of shaped safety practices in the rail industry?
Yeah, Lac-Mégantic was a real turning point for rail safety. It really highlighted a few key things. How important it is to properly secure unattended trains, to follow proper brake testing procedures, and to have really thorough emergency response plans in place, especially when you're transporting hazardous materials. In the wake of that accident, both the rail industry and the regulatory agencies conducted very thorough investigations, and that led to some really significant changes in regulations, operating procedures, and training programs to try to prevent similar events from happening.
So it's a reminder that safety is an ongoing journey, right? It's this continuous process of learning from past mistakes and striving for improvement.
It is, and that's true not just for railroads, but for all modes of transportation. Now let's shift our focus skyward a bit and talk about aviation safety.
Okay, fasten your seatbelts, everyone.
Ah.
Plane crashes, while they are statistically rare, they always seem to capture the headlines and spark a lot of concern. What are some of the key factors that contribute to aviation accidents? And how is the industry working to mitigate those risks?
Well, like with other forms of transportation, human error, unfortunately, remains a significant factor in aviation accidents. So we're talking pilot fatigue, miscommunication, inadequate training, just errors in judgment. All of these can create vulnerabilities in the system.
It's a lot of responsibility that rests on the shoulders of those pilots. Navigating those complex aircraft at high speeds and altitudes.
It is. It's a very demanding job. And that's why the aviation industry places such a huge emphasis on pilot training, proficiency checks, and fatigue management programs. Pilots go through really rigorous training in simulators and real-world scenarios to hone their skills and to prepare them for a wide range of situations. And there are also strict regulations that govern flight time limitations and rest requirements. And those are all there to help prevent those fatigue-related errors.
It's good to know. So it's like building layers of redundancy into the system to kind of minimize the potential for those human errors.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. And we're also seeing a lot of advancements in cockpit technology.
Oh, yeah.
And that's helping to reduce the workload on pilots and enhance safety. So we're talking things like advanced autopilot systems, electronic flight bags that are replacing those big, bulky paper manuals, and head-up displays that actually project critical flight information right onto the windshield. So the pilots can monitor that data without having to take their eyes off the runway.
Wow. So it sounds like the cockpit is becoming more and more automated. But how do we make sure that pilots are maintaining their skills and, their ability to take over manual control if they need to?
That is the question of the day. As automation does become more and more prevalent in aviation, it's crucial that we find that balance, the balance between relying on that technology, but also making sure the pilot is proficient. So training programs are adapting to incorporate more scenarios where pilots have to intervene and override those automated systems. And there's a lot of ongoing research and discussion about how to design the cockpits in a way that enhances situational awareness and supports good pilot decision-making, both in those automated and manual modes of flight.
It's fascinating to see how the aviation industry is, grappling with those challenges. And it's clear that they're always working to, continually strive to improve safety.
It is, and it's not just about those human factors and that cockpit technology. We're also seeing some big advancements in aircraft design and maintenance practices that are making flying safer.
Like what? What are some of those advancements?
Well, modern aircraft are just designed with so many more safety features. Redundant systems, fail-safe mechanisms. They're using more advanced materials and construction techniques to improve structural integrity, to make them more crash-worthy.
Okay.
And the maintenance protocols are way more rigorous. Regular inspections, preventative maintenance, all of that is scheduled. And they use sophisticated diagnostic tools to try to detect and address any potential problems way before they can even lead to an incident.
So it seems like the aviation industry is really leaving no stone unturned when it comes to their pursuit of safety.
That's the goal, to make flying as safe as possible. And it's working,
Yeah.
Flying has become so much safer over the years. The accident rates have steadily declined.
Right.
But everybody recognizes that complacency is the enemy of safety.
Yeah.
So that quest for continuous improvement, that never ends.
That's an important message. Safety isn't a destination, it's a journey. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into transportation safety, I want to touch on one more mode of transport that I think often gets overlooked, and that is pipelines. We talked briefly about some of the risks associated with pipelines earlier, but what are some of the specific safety measures that are being implemented to protect those, vital lifelines of our modern society?
Yeah, pipelines are sort of the unsung heroes, I think, of our infrastructure. They're moving massive amounts of oil, gas, water, other essential resources over these long distances. And as we said, they do come with some inherent risks, leaks, ruptures, explosions. They can be devastating. But the pipeline industry has made some major strides in enhancing safety. And it's a combination of things: technological advancements, better regulatory oversight, and just a greater focus on operational excellence.
And I'm curious about those technological advancements. What kind of innovations are being used to, monitor the pipelines and detect those potential problems, before they can escalate?
Yeah. So one of the big areas of focus has been developing much more sophisticated leak detection systems.
Yeah.
So now you're seeing fiber optic cables that run along the pipeline, and they actually used light to detect really small changes in temperature or vibration that could indicate a leak. They're also using these acoustic sensors that can listen for the sound of gas or liquid escaping.
Oh, wow.
And companies are doing a lot more intelligent pigging. And that's where they're sending these devices through the pipeline to inspect for corrosion, for cracks, or any other defects that could compromise the integrity of the pipeline.
So it seems like these technologies are providing a much more, comprehensive and proactive approach to pipeline monitoring.
They are. And the data that's gathered from these monitoring systems can be analyzed in real time.
Sure.
And that can alert the operators to a potential problem so they can take action before it turns into a leak or a rupture.
Wow. So that's a huge step forward in preventing those, catastrophic incidents that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, a big improvement. And the industry is also focusing a lot on improving those construction and maintenance practices. So pipelines are being built now with stronger materials, they're using more robust welding techniques, and those inspections are happening regularly to identify and address any potential weaknesses.
It's reassuring to know that, these measures are being taken to ensure that these really critical pieces of infrastructure are operating safely.
Absolutely. But again, it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the infrastructure. That human factor plays a critical role in pipeline safety, too.
Right.
The operators, the inspectors, the maintenance crews, they all have to be properly trained, they have to be vigilant, and they have to be committed to following those safety procedures.
So it goes back to that idea that, even with all these technological advancements, that human expertise and that accountability are still essential.
Couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up our conversation today about transportation safety, I think that's a key takeaway. It's a shared responsibility. It requires collaboration. It requires innovation and this constant pursuit of excellence. And it's at every level, from the design and engineering of the systems themselves to the choices that we make as individuals.
Yeah, that's a powerful message to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in this exploration of transportation safety, from those familiar dangers of motor vehicles to the more complex world of, railroads, aviation, and pipelines.
We've explored the risks, the regulations, the technological advancements, and all those human factors that play a part in keeping us safe.
And I think most importantly, we've highlighted the crucial role that each and every one of us plays in making transportation safer for ourselves and for others.
So as you head out on your next journey, whether it's a short commute or a cross-country trip, just remember that safety is a shared responsibility. It's an ongoing journey that requires all of our attention and our effort.
So be informed, make responsible choices, and advocate for continuous improvement. Because at the end of the day, we all want to reach our destination safely. Thanks for joining us on Key Safety Talks. Until next time, stay safe.